Well, hey there, and welcome to yet another one of my cheesy YouTube videos. On this video, we are going to mess with the oxygen sensors on my 99 Dodge Dakota with a 2.5 Jeep engine in it. The other day, my wife and I were out running around in it, and when we took off from somewhere, it started spitting and sputtering and coughing and backfiring and just acting like a fool. Put the clutch in, revved her up a little bit, and she started running better. And she ran fine. Then it did it again a little later. Knowing that that is a symptom of a bad oxygen sensor, and also knowing that years ago I found the connector to my upstream oxygen sensor laying on the exhaust manifold, and it was all melted and nasty, and I kind of kludged it together and hung it out of the way. So I figure this is a good time to change that sensor regardless. So let's talk about the sensors real quick. This particular pickup truck has got two oxygen sensors on it. One called the upstream. It is before the catalytic converter. What it does is it senses how much oxygen is in the burnt, spent exhaust coming out of the engine. If there's too much oxygen, it's got a lower voltage reading, and it means that it is running lean. If it is too little oxygen in it, then it's got a higher voltage reading, and it means it's running rich. Now the voltage reading is like 0.1 to 0.9, so we're not talking about a lot of voltage here. The oxygen sensors also create their own voltage, and that is done once the engine gets up. Once the sensor gets up to about 600 degrees, it will start working and create its own voltage. Before the engine warms up, the computer runs the engine on something called an open loop system. And what that is, it bypasses the oxygen sensor. It uses predetermined data inside of the computer to set the parameters of the fuel injection, timing, and all that stuff, along with using some of the other sensors that are on the engine. Once the engine warms up, then it goes to closed loop configuration, and then it's using data from the oxygen sensors along with several other sensors like the water temperature sensor and the air intake temperature sensor, their absolute air pressure sensor, which is also intake pressure, and uses all these sensors together to determine how long the injectors should be opened, the pulse width of the injectors. So it fluctuates that to increase and decrease fuel to the engine. The throttle plate would be what would control the speed, and that's in the throttle body itself. So in the closed loop system, it's trying to maintain 14.7 to 1. That's 14.7 parts oxygen to 1 part fuel. That's optimal for a good clean burning engine. So it's using data from the oxygen sensors to adjust the fuel ratio to try to maintain that 14.7 to 1. So that's how important the oxygen sensors are. Now a minute ago I mentioned the upstream sensor, which is the one before the catalytic converter. There's also a downstream sensor on this particular 2.5 Jeep engine. I'm not talking about all vehicles. A lot of vehicles have lots of oxygen sensors. The downstream sensor, all it does is monitoring how well the catalytic converter is burning off excess fuel that has gone through the exhaust. Catalytic converters, the way they work is they get super hot and they will ignite unburnt fuel as it passes through the converter, which is part of the exhaust system. Also, just a quick side note, if you're out in the country driving around in tall grass and stuff like that, catalytic converters have been known to catch the grass on fire. And I worked on a 40,000 acre ranch as a mechanic years ago, and more than once did a little old pickup truck catch the field on fire. So keep that in mind. So now we know how the sensor works and what it does. This is the plug for the upstream O2 sensor. I've worked its way out from underneath, and I've got it sitting here. And I was able to replace the components to the plug with a plug off my junk Dakota. So that really worked out real good. I was afraid I was going to have to splice it. I don't like cutting and splicing wires. Easy to do. I'm sorry I don't have the whole thing. I'm sorry I wasn't videoing when I did it. But it was pretty easy to do. This is an example of what the pins look like. The upstream oxygen sensor is on the exhaust pipe. Here's the intake. It's back underneath here. Getting to it may not be any fun. Since it's got a wire on it, I'm using this special socket. This is a 7/8 socket. Technically, I think the sensor is 22. I've also sprayed it with PB Blaster twice yesterday and once just now. Cross your fingers that it comes off. I don't feel like jacking with it. Okay, I crawled underneath. I put that new special socket on it. About a 10 or 12 inch extension. And then a 3/8 drive swivel ratchet. The extension came up right there, just behind the manifold, not far from the brake booster. And I was able to bust it loose with that 3/8 drive ratchet. I just wanted to show you that in case you wind up having to do it. If I had the time, I would try to find a 22, something that fits snugger. Maybe even take a 22 deep well impact socket and grind it out. Grind a slot down the side for the wiring. But this one worked, and it's coming loose. So I'm going to back this one out. We'll put the new one in. The new one came pre-coated with anti-seize. If yours isn't pre-coated, I'd suggest putting anti-seize on it so you're able to take it off later on, because this is a very common part to go bad. Like I said, I'll take this one out, put the other one in, hook her up and get her going. So this is the plug from the one I just took out. I mean, it still may have been working. It was in really bad shape. I've got the new sensor in. I wire tied its plug up high just to keep its wiring from laying on the exhaust. In order to do this job, I've removed the battery. I unplugged the MAP sensor, manifold absolute pressure sensor, just so the wire wasn't in the way. I've taken the ductwork off of the throttle body, along with the filter assembly. I used a flat blade screwdriver and a 5/16 socket to take the intake assembly, the ductwork off. I bought two oxygen sensors. I was going to replace them both, but since this back one has nothing to do with poor performance, and I'm tired of jacking with it, I'm going to just put it back together. In order for the wiring harness to stretch high enough to get to it, I had to unplug this plug from the side of the transmission. Take her off the ramps. Remember, she's cold. Our O2 sensors are colder than 600 degrees, so they are not going to produce that voltage that the computer's going to need to see in order to run it in a closed loop situation. So it's going to be open loop, which means the computer is going to use predetermined data to run the truck. So in other words, starting it, I shouldn't see any difference. Got the belt squealing. Typical Jeep setup. The tensioner is not spring loaded. Let's jack around with this old oxygen sensor. I'm not using any data from a book. Tell me what my parameters should be. But let's just think it out and play with it. My sensor particularly has 4 wires. So in this case, that means these 2 white wires, they're the same. They are to a built-in heater in the sensor. The gray and the black, one is a ground, one is a signal that sends a signal to the computer. So let's check the heater first. I got the meter set on the ohm scale. It's going to read OL or 0L. That means the meter leads aren't touching, there's no path. If there's a path, the stronger the path, the more it goes to solid zeros. So right now it's OL, no path. Now the leads are together, and it's a complete solid path. Means there's no resistance to electron flow. In general, the way electric heater works is you won't have a closed path, but what you'll have is a path that has resistance to it. It's the resistance to electron flow that causes the heater element to heat. So in other words, you won't have OL because you're going to have a path, but you won't have solid zeros because it won't be a solid path. There'll be some resistance in there. I'm at 5.3, 5.2. The heater can be assumed to be good, but does it fall within the parameters of the manufacturer for that, for this O2 sensor? I don't know. We don't have that data in front of us, but that's okay. We know that it is most likely good. The next thing we're going to check is we're going to try to check to see if this sensor will create a signal. Like I said, one of the black and gray wires sends the signal to the computer. The other one's a ground. Now, my only question is the ground also grounded to the body of the sensor? So I'm going to hook one to the wire and try my best to scratch it and get a path. There's no path, so the chassis ground is most likely, it does not ground to the chassis of the sensor. I'm going to do the same with the other one. Nothing. And since we're doing resistance, it doesn't matter whether I'm using black or red. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hook the black and red each to a wire. Still no path. But for this part of the test, we're going to need to switch it to the volt scale. I'm on DC volts. If you look up top there, you should see an MV, which means it's millivolts. Just to help keep my brain straight, I'm going to click through the ranges. I've just switched it to just volts. So millivolts will be point whatever. Because I got a heat gun clamped into a vise. I'm going to heat this sensor up and see if we can get over 600 degrees and look for changes in the multimeter. Got my sensor sitting over the heat. 580. It's bouncing back and forth, so it's pretty hot. I'm on my volt scale. Nothing's happening yet on my volts. So my voltage is creeping up. It's 0.0445. We're at 1.105. Oh yeah, 644, 640. .126. So we know that the heat is creating a voltage, and we're seeing that happen with the voltmeter. 690 something. So what have we proven? Nothing. We're seeing how it creates voltage just from the heat, which is kind of cool. Same way solar panels work. We're not seeing it creating enough voltage to be within the parameters, but we just don't know exactly if that's because the tester's bad or we're not getting enough heat. Since I didn't replace both sensors, I got an extra one here. And I just heated it up. The range I got out of it, the voltage I got out of it was totally different than the other one. This, real quick, this one went up to 0.225, 0.22 this or that. So it's responding a heck of a sight quicker. and it's showing higher voltage pretty quick on here. So I do believe that the first sensor, if nothing else, wasn't responding correctly. Did I prove anything? Probably not. To me, I did, though. I proved that that sensor, first sensor, did not respond like it should. So it was fun to play with. You don't necessarily need to have the manual sometimes to test something, if you understand how things work. Thank you for watching this video. Please hit the like button. Please subscribe to my channel. And remember, if you love life and learning new things, go aimless.com. And that means goaimless.com is my website. If you want to find my videos easier than digging through YouTube, go to my website, goaimless.com. Thanks a bunch.